Hello again, and this is the podcast Paranormal Family Therapy, and I am your host, Dr. Darren Wallace. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm a certified addictions counselor. I've been working with families since 1996, and I've been working with families dealing with paranormal phenomena in family therapy since about 2002, so about 20 years. Paranormal Family Therapy is a podcast that talks about paranormal phenomena and how the psychotherapeutic community interacts with the paranormal, with family therapy in particular. Our guest today is Lisa Schultz. So, Lisa, welcome.
Hello.
Lisa is a professional medium, energy healer, and a licensed clinical social worker. She's been in private practice for over 20 years, serving both children and adults in her clinical practice. Lisa has been a medium her whole life and began working professionally as a medium approximately 10 years ago.
Mhm.
She's passionate and about providing hope to clients about the afterlife and loves teaching people ways to connect with their loved ones on the other side. So, welcome, Lisa. Welcome to Paranormal Family Therapy. I'm excited about interviewing you and hearing what you have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So you're well. Let's start because I think there's one thing that folks in the therapeutic world understand this, but in the paranormal community, they may not know what a licensed clinical social worker is, right?
Hmm.
People understand that what a license like a licensed psychiatrist is, what a
Right.
licensed psychologist is. They might
Hmm.
get those two mixed up sometimes, but they understand what a licensed marriage and family therapist is
Right.
because of the title. They understand, yeah, you probably do family therapy, couples therapy,
Hmm.
but they're not always clear on what a licensed clinical social worker is.
Right.
But so for most licensed clinical social workers or LCSWs,
Hmm.
um, they're therapists, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Social work is a
yeah,
big umbrella term for
yeah,
a lot of
mhm,
things, right?
yeah,
And so clinical is the key word in it,
mm,
meaning clinical practice, therapeutic practice.
yeah,
So when I was in graduate school, I majored in the clinical side of social work, which was being a therapist.
mhm,
Back when I was in grad school, if you wanted to get a master's degree in psychology, you were going to be doing more research based work in
mhm.
the labs, which was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to work more with people in a therapeutic setting. So that's why I chose the clinical social work graduate degree over
Yeah.
a psychology graduate degree.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, good. And I think it's helpful for folks because, some people, when they hear clinical social work, they're like, okay, do you work for like Department of Human Services
Yeah.
or,
And you can,
yeah,
with
and
that
you
degree, you
can. Yeah.
can, or you can be in private practice. You can do so many different things with this degree. So,
Oh, yeah. It's wide variety.
yeah.
So now what you are, you're a medium and you're
Yes.
also a licensed clinical social worker, a therapist.
Yes.
So please share with me your sensitivity to the spiritual realm and how did that get started?
Well, I always was sensitive to the
Mhm.
spiritual realm, but as a kid, you don't recognize that other people aren't having the same types of experiences that you are. I was born in the 70s, raised in the 80s. So there was no paranormal shows, there was no internet. People didn't really talk about the spirit world unless you were like within the Catholic Church or something like that, So it just wasn't talked about when I was coming up. So I didn't have any I didn't have any reference or any conversations about it so much when I was a kid, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when these experiences were first happening for you as a young child, what were some of those things that were happening, and how did you how was it managed by the people around you? Like what
Yep.
happened?
Mhm.
What
So
was
the
that like?
first memory I have of me witnessing the spirit world was when I was about 6 or 7 years old. That's the first memory I have. And back then I had had a little camp out at my house, which is what my brothers and I would call it if our parents let us sleep on the couch in the living room. So
Mhm.
that's where I happened to be that night. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was, but it was dark. I remember it was still dark out. And I saw, as I opened my eyes, I looked towards the center of the living room and I saw this beautiful purple, dark purple glitter just very slowly moving in
Mhm.
like a cylinder form. And it was very mesmerizing to me. And to back up a little bit, I had a little container of dark purple glitter that I used to love to do arts and crafts with when I was a kid. And I loved it so much. I was afraid I was going to use it all because I just loved the way it looked. Well,
Uh-huh.
anyways, that is the same type of glitter that I kept seeing going around like this in the living room. And then all of a sudden, my grandfather, who had passed away before I was born, emerged from it. And he
Mm.
didn't say anything to me. He just looked at me and smiled. And I felt such a loving presence from him. I can't really put words on it. It was just this moment in time where I was mesmerized because I'm sitting there looking at him. And it was just such a loving presence. And he turned around and he moved through the living room towards the front door and then moved through the front door. I could see the front door. It was in my line of vision from where I was on
Yeah.
the couch. And I remember saying out loud, Grandpa, go see Grandma because she misses you. I remember
Mhm.
saying that. And
Yeah.
then I guess I went to bed. It was not an experience that was scary. It was not an experience that left me startled and frightened. It wasn't anything like that. And, all these years now working with spirit and listening to spirit and mediumship, I know that our loved ones don't want to scare us,
Yeah.
which is why I know that my grandfather used that purple glitter first. Because
Mhm.
if he had just shown up like that,
Yeah.
standing over me, I would have freaked out. I would 6 or 7. I mean, as an adult, I would freak out, right? But he used that as his introduction in a way to calm me down. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
so,
Yeah.
anyways, that was my first experience with the spirit world.
Mhm. Can
That's
I
it.
ask you about that? How much of that did you share with, your family members, with your grandma, folks like that? And what was their response? If you did share that, what was their response to you?
So the next day, I
Mhm.
told my mom about it because it was her
Uh-huh.
father. And I still remember this. She was at the sink, the kitchen sink doing dishes, and I was to her right. And I said,
Mhm.
Mom, guess who I saw last night? She's like, Who? And I said, Grandpa. And she looked at me and I go, Your dad, because my other grandfather was
Mhm.
alive. And I said, Your dad. And I described everything that he was
Yeah.
wearing and I described the experience to her. And she just like looked down at me and looked back at her dishes and kept doing the dishes. And that was it. There was
Uh-huh.
no, oh, I believe you, or tell me more. It was just, I'm sure in her mind, again, this had to be 1979, 1980, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
In that time frame, it was probably, oh, this is her imagination. She just dismissed it. Right. That's how it
Mhm.
was. I didn't feel a rejection from my mom.
Mhm.
I did not feel that. I just felt like, you know, okay, I told her and that's it. And I moved on. So,
Mhm.
and then I
Oh,
didn't have any other experiences with the spirit world that I'm recalling during that time in my life. It really didn't start to pick up again until I was in my late teens, early 20s when I was in undergraduate. That's when a lot of other things started happening more frequently for me.
mhm.
So that's how it evolved in my case.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Mm.
My experiences, and you and I have talked periodically a few times in the last several years
Yeah,
over cases, and some of them were
right,
just um, they were regular old. They weren't hauntings or anything like that. They were just
right,
regular psychotherapeutic
right.
marriage and family therapy kinds of cases. But the hauntings that I work with people about on in family therapy, that experience that you had is not always their experience, right? Their experience is that someone in the house might be a sensitive, they tell others what they're seeing or hearing or what's going on, and they're not met with something that's somewhat neutral, like your experience seemed is somewhat
Mhm.
neutral,
Right.
not negative, not really, oh my gosh, tell me more about it.
Hmm.
And that some of these families, at least the initial response from family members can be negative.
Yeah.
about this, and so it's good for me to hear that your experience was at least it was all right.
It was
Yeah,
neutral.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was neutral. Then
yeah.
we just moved forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Now, then you moved forward. Grew up. Did you have other experiences growing up, and what were some of those?
Yeah. Like, so when I was in my early 20s, I was an
Mhm.
undergrad and I went to the University of Georgia for a bachelor's degree
Athens.
in psych. Yes, Athens, Georgia, for a
I've been
bachelor's
there.
degree in psychology. Yep.
Uh-huh.
And I lived downtown, which, if you know Athens, it's an old town, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think the university was back from the 1700s.
Hmm.
But I lived in a building, had a store on the bottom, and then upstairs was converted apartments. And so there was a lot of hauntings, like traditional, what we would say as a haunting versus a visitation, like I had from my grandfather. So
Yeah.
there was paranormal activity in this building. And things would happen like, our stove would turn on its own. We would all of a sudden smell fire, not just me, but myself, my roommate. If we had guests, one time we had guests over who totally were skeptical because we would say, "This place is haunted." And oh, yeah, 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 right. And then all of a sudden we all smell fire, like something's
Mm.
burning. And we ran through the apartment, all of us, and nothing was going on. And then there was another time that like my friend had a statue that was top heavy. So she'd always lean it up against the wall, like the head of it would be up against the wall. And one
Mhm.
time we came home and it was just standing straight up, which was like virtually impossible for that to happen.
Yeah.
So, there were a lot of things like that. And then how we ended up actually meeting the people who were in the building with us, the other apartment dwellers. I remember watching television with my roommate in the living room, and all of a sudden we heard all this screaming, like screaming in the hallway outside. So we immediately open the doors and walk out, and it's this lady that lived, across the hall down a little bit, and she's like freaking out, and we're like, "What's wrong? What happened?" And she's like, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here again, but you remember word processors?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
uh,
so for people who don't know what a word processor is, it's like a cross between a computer and a typewriter. So
yeah.
it's like kind of looks like a typewriter, but it's got this tiny little screen, and you have to feed the paper in like you would a typewriter. And then when you're done typing, you press print and it prints it all out for you right there.
Mhm.
Okay. So, anyways, you have to feed it in, and the paper locks in. So she's just working on a paper on her word processor. And she said, we're typing away. All of a sudden, the paper flew out, like just flew out of the word processor. And that they lock those papers in, right? It's not,
Mhm.
and it's certainly not going to just fly out
Yeah.
and go straight up.
Yeah. There's no
No way.
mechanism that's going to throw it out like that. Yeah.
Right. So she was really scared and startled by it. And so then, other people had come out, and then they were sharing stories. We shared stories of what had happened in our house, our apartment, as well. So that's how we all met each other. And it
Mhm.
turned out that the building was so old. I can't remember. It's sometime built in the early 1800s. It was at one time used as a Civil War hospital. So there were many, many things that happened there that were conducive to paranormal activity.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that was
Okay.
one of the big things that happened when I was a young person. Yeah.
Okay. And then, how did you develop this sensitivity that you have to the spirit realm? I mean, how did that progress to the point where then 10 years ago, for the last 10 years at least, you've been a professional medium as well as being 20 years in the field as a licensed clinical social worker. So how did that develop?
So it developed gradually and on to some degree reluctantly on my part from a
Oh.
professional standpoint.
Hmm.
So again, I had had all these experiences that kept on happening, especially in my early 20s and moving up. It was just starting to increase more and more and more these experiences. And I remember distinctly having a conversation with one of my childhood friends. We were probably, I don't know, 25, 26, somewhere in there. And we were talking about a mutual friend, and I said, "Oh yeah, so and so, blah blah blah." And she goes, "How do you know that?" And I thought, "How do you not know that?" Like, and
Yeah.
it was just like, wait, how do I know that about them?
Mhm.
And so it was sort of like this awakening that happened gradually to me. And again, I'm very grounded and down to earth. I would never think I was raised in the 80s, okay, just south of Detroit, very working class neighborhood. My dad was a factory worker, my mom stayed at home and then eventually went back to work and was, a secretary. There was no thought ever in my mind that I would ever work professionally as a medium. Like
Mm-hmm.
never. Like I
Mm-hmm.
never thought that. And so, here I am, fast forward, and you know, times have changed. The reality shows have come out. It's more normal to talk about hauntings. It's normalized, about the spirit world outside of the church, right? All these things that happened. I ended up in a situation where I got some energy work done for me. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
here's, us as therapists, right?
Yeah.
Talk therapy, it's gradual. People feel change, but it's a gradual change. And talk therapy is just kind of like, I always say, it's like being on a dirt road. You have to slow down your car a little bit, to process. Just you're going through talk therapy. When you do energy healing with talk therapy, it's like you're on the Autobahn. So this is what happened to me. I had a very stressful situation. I ended up going for energy healing, not fully knowing what it was. I never had anybody work on me before. And this issue that I was having was resolved after one session.
Wow.
And this was an issue that I was really struggling with and had been for several months. It was big. And so I could not believe it as a clinician. I could not believe, are you serious? It's gone after one session of energy work? No way. So I
Uh-huh.
kept going back and learning more and more. I eventually got trained in it. It's something I do now and incorporate it into my practice. But that's what really taught me that energy is real. Energy is real and we
Mm-hmm.
can move it. We can interact with it. So that's how I knew, like, tangibly, this is real. So
Mm-hmm.
then the next step for me turned out to be, unbeknownst to me at the time, mediumship. I knew I was having all these paranormal experiences. I knew spirit was interacting with me, but for some reason, I never thought I could interact back.
Yeah.
And it
Mm-hmm.
could be two-way. I
Mm-hmm.
just didn't have that type of confidence, I guess, or just even awareness that I could do it. It never crossed my mind. So, anyways, I ended up in a training with James Van Prague, who is a famous American medium, and it was an energy awareness training. But during this weekend, he had us all partner up and give each other a mediumship reading, which I was terrified when he told us we had to do this. I mean, truly, I was like, oh no, I can't do this. No, there's no way. Turns out I could do it. I did do it. And I was shocked. So
Uh-huh.
that's how I ended up starting it. And I really, truly thought I'll just keep this to myself. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to enroll in some of these classes because I want to see how far I can take this. I want to know what my abilities are. But again, never thinking I would ever, in a sense, come out of the closet, right? I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I mean, what are people going to say? People are going to
Yeah.
think I'm
Mm-hmm.
crazy, right? Oh, the therapist that hears voices. You know what I mean? Like,
Uh-huh.
I don't want to sign up for that. No. So, but anyway, with James's classes, I had to give readings and videotape them and send them on to him in order to get approved for the next level. And more people kept hearing about me. My readings, must have been doing something right. And
Mm-hmm.
more people heard about me. And here we are 10 years later. It just evolved into that, where
Wow.
now I'm
Yeah.
doing that at least 50-60% of the time for my
Mm-hmm.
career, in addition to clinical social work and energy work.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Your timeline is very similar to mine as far because what you're describing has been described to me by a close friend of mine from the LGBTQ plus community as
Hmm.
sort of like a coming out process, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I think the at least for me that coming out process was once I had my PhD, then I was like, you know what? I think it's time that I really start speaking out loud to, just everyday folks that, yeah, this is something that I do. And
Hmm.
it gradually became part of my website and other things that, I would share with people. Yeah.
Hmm.
So it was, in the time frame that you're talking about is around the same time for myself as well, about 10 years ago or so is
Yep.
when I really
Yeah.
started saying, yeah, this is, some of the work that I do. One of the things that I've experienced with another medium, we were actually meeting on Zoom, is that she could actually see some things through Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just think that's fascinating. And that, mediums are able to, do all of this through the camera as well. I just think that's amazing.
Well, energy is not local.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So it doesn't matter if you are on Zoom. It doesn't matter if you're on the telephone. I've given some readings to some ladies who are, in their 70s and 80s. They don't do Zoom, it's a phone call,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
And you can still give a reading that way
Yeah.
because really what you're doing is we are connecting with the higher realm, people who are moving at a much higher, faster vibration because they are no longer anchored into the body. They're not in the physical world anymore, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so if I can connect with them, there's no reason why I can't connect with you over Zoom or over a phone call, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes we need that like clarification. But yeah, it's all, mostly in your mind's eye because you have that heightened awareness of people around.
Hmm. Oh, that's
Yeah,
great.
it's really
So,
cool.
it is. It's cool. So when you are able to see and notice and sense some of these things,
Yeah.
like a spirit, are you seeing that with with your mind's eye? Are you seeing it with your eyes? Help me to understand what it is that you experience.
Yeah. So there's two different ways that you can tap into the spirit world, which
Hmm.
is you can see things objectively, which is like right now I'm looking at you objectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So you're where you are and I'm where I am. This is all objective. This is
Yeah.
right. So we sometimes mediums can see that, although it is very rare, even for like the most accurate historical mediums out there. It is rare, but it's possible to see objectively. Okay.
Hmm.
But then there's subjective, which is your mind's eye. So
Yeah.
typically, mediums will see things in their mind's eye versus someone manifesting in front of them, right? Or we will hear them in our mind's eye, we will feel them because it's all energy based, right? But
Hmm.
I don't think that there's any difference between objective and subjective when it comes to accuracy.
Yeah.
It's not because a medium has to be disciplined enough to know what is my imagination versus what is truly what am I tuning into,
Hmm.
right? And that's through daily meditation and a lot of training and work that way.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like for
Okay.
example, my grandfather, the first time I saw him
Hmm.
was objective.
Yeah.
Like it was objective. He was there, right? And so, but most of the time, I mean, like it's only happened to me a handful of times where I've experienced something objective. Like I actually felt somebody touch me before. Again, this is my young adulthood. Somebody
Hmm.
touched me before. I've heard a voice, which doesn't happen very often. Usually, auditory will come in sort of like your own thoughts. And again, you have to be disciplined enough to know what is my thought versus what is spirit speaking to
Hmm.
me. But there has been a time where I've heard something objectively and I was aware that it was only me that heard it. So it can happen that way. It can happen that way.
Okay.
That
All
makes
right.
sense.
Yeah. Oh, perfect sense.
Yeah.
Um, Now, in some of my interactions with mediums more on a personal level, they've shared with me that their belief is that anyone can develop this. Some people are it comes more natural to them. I'm
Mhm.
just curious, do you have any thoughts on that? Interacting with all of these different folks that you do, are you working with them on their abilities as a sensitive as well? I mean, I'm just curious how all that works for you or your opinion on it.
I think that everyone can develop their ability to take it to the next level.
Uh-huh.
I put it this way, like all of us can learn to play the piano, but not everyone's going to be Mozart.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the same thing with your ability. I mean, it just depends on you individually. Like, how high can you develop it? How
Mhm.
intensely can you develop it? And then what do you choose to do with it as well? Right. So
Okay.
yes, I do believe that mediums are born. I think that
Hmm.
many of us are born, but I think
Yes.
everyone can train. Everyone can train. But what your individual result will be, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
yes, and to answer the other part of your question, yeah, I do work with some people about um, creating and being disciplined to have their own connection with the spirit world. Because ultimately, the
Mhm.
people who come to me who want to talk with their husband or with their, mother or their child, even, I want them to learn through meditation how to open up that channel so that they can believe it when they get the
Mhm.
sign from their loved one, but they can feel more connected because that is what the healing is all about as well. They might not have the same level of degree of hearing and seeing and feeling people in spirit like I do or another professional medium. But if they have something that they can work with, something that feels true and tangible to them, then there's hope in that. There's healing in that. So yes, I do work with them too. teaching them.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Because I know, look, I see myself, at least amongst therapists, as I'm kind of like the average sensitive when it comes to therapists. Because therapists, a lot of therapists are sensitive to
Yes.
emotion. They're very empathetic and have a natural sensitivity to other people.
Right.
And so amongst them, I'm kind of average, amongst the average person, maybe I'm a little more sensitive, but my
Hmm.
wife is more sensitive than I am. Some
Yeah.
of the work that I've done, occasionally, some of these spirits will follow me home,
Hmm.
when I'm working with family, and then they'll follow me.
Yep.
And then she has stories where she's like, "Oh my gosh, did you have one of your haunted house cases today?" And yeah, I did. Why? And well, they're actually here.
Yep.
Things like that. For
Hmm.
you, do you ever have problems with attachments or things that come home with you when you do readings with folks? How does that work for you?
I think the key here is boundaries. And this is
Mhm.
one of the gifts of being a therapist, is that we know boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Like we leave it at work. We just have very strict, like fortress type boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
so I've used that with mediumship. But yes, there have been a couple of times where someone has followed me home if I've done a group reading or whatnot. And I have to tell them to go away and do what
Yeah.
I need to
Uh-huh.
do to get rid of them. And they do go. And this is one of the big myths. And I think this is what scares a lot of people about the paranormal world, is that we are all sovereign over our space. We are more powerful than we realize. Okay. So
Mhm.
we can tell someone in the spirit world to go away, and they will. We can push them out visual, we can
Yeah.
visualize it. We can push it. We can use a spray, whatever your method is. You are powerful. You are more powerful than you believe, right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
people don't realize that.
Yeah.
They think that, and yes, we can become susceptible to an attachment. Yes, that is all true. We can, but we can also use ways to protect ourselves, and we can also use ways to get rid of them. Sometimes we might need help from another professional,
Yes. Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
But many times we can take care of it ourselves. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know. And my experience has been is that sometimes it takes one person to be able to help push something out, the
Yes.
person themselves. That's one of the greatest things that can happen for the person, is to have the courage and strength to do that. And sometimes it takes family members to be able to do that. Sometimes it
Yeah.
takes the family to do that. Sometimes it's a spiritual person like yourself
Mhm.
that does that. And there's a word that I've used. It just fits where someone, and some people just have this where they have authority. And what I mean by that, there's authority that perhaps was bestowed upon them, but then
Mhm.
also like a personal authority
Yeah.
that they can actually just kind of show up and say these things and get something to leave or
Right.
go,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Through the power of their personality, and definitely through like faith and other things. And so, yeah,
Absolutely. Well, Catholic priests,
yeah,
right, who are experienced in exorcism, and experienced in hauntings and things like that. They have that authority
yeah,
as well, and that training in it. And, the thing about religion is that people, like for example, a Catholic priest, they believe this is real.
hmm
You can have a family who's struggling with a haunting or something going on in their home, and they might be afraid to come to a therapist because they think they'll never believe me, right?
yeah,
But they might feel more comfortable going to, a person of the cloth to have them, take care of it, right?
yeah,
So it's all about, I think a lot of people, I would assume a lot of people have fears around how believable is this,
yeah,
right? What's happening to me? Who's going to believe me? What are they
yeah,
going to think of
yeah,
me?
mhm,
Like this is crazy. How is this possible? Right.
yeah,
So, yes. But people, there's also, people who are not Catholic priests who have authority to
yeah,
do this. There are other people who are trained, and I'm sure there's shamans and, different types of professionals who are able to go in and clear something and
yes,
handle it. I just wish that people knew, individuals knew how powerful they truly were,
uh-huh,
right? Again, yes, you may need some extra professional help to come in for sure. I'm not discounting that at all. But you also have the power and the authority over your own space to command someone to leave.
Well, that's very helpful in the particular kind of work that I do when I'm working with families is letting people know that they do have that power, and as a group, as a family, and especially
Right.
if they're all unified, there's no weak links. All of them are
Right.
on the same page. There's
Yep.
not one person in the family that's a naysayer, that they're all on the same page. How much more powerful that can be,
Yes.
when you have a group of folks, saying this and doing these things. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anything that you'd like to be able to say to let folks know about your work specifically, or something that you'd like for folks to understand before we end today? Anything at all?
Well, I think that, the paranormal world is a big one, right?
Uh,
I mean, the work that you do with families is different than the work that I do with
yeah.
families.
Hmm.
So I don't specialize in hauntings. I don't go into homes and do clearings. I don't do those. I have the utmost respect for people who do that, but I kind of do, in a sense, like therapeutic. How do you say it? Therapy with the other side.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, when we have issues in our relationships, we just
Uh-huh.
do, right?
Yeah.
And just because someone has passed on to the next world, doesn't mean that those issues always are resolved before that happens. And
Hmm.
so it's really unique for me as a therapist, because when people come into me for a reading, many times it feels like therapy, because people in spirit many times are able to say they're sorry,
Hmm.
have a new perspective of what
Hmm.
they did, their behaviors when they were here, um, that they were not able to do when they were here in the limited physical world. But
Yeah.
now they are able to do it. And it's incredibly healing for my clients to hear from maybe a troubled relationship, to see it from another perspective, and to reframe some things. So that's a really unique thing for me as a therapist and a medium, that definitely can and does happen in a lot of the work that I do.
Oh, great. That's
Yeah.
great to hear. Well, thank you, Lisa, for being with us here today. Lisa Schultz, I appreciate your time and your story. So thank you. And thank you all for listening today. This has been Paranormal Family Therapy, and I am your host, Dr. Darren Wallace. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Darren. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.